In Spain, Manel and his wife Julia are driving home in their car. Julia brings up the topic of having children. The conversation turns into an argument, and both of them get distracted. Julia swerves the car to avoid an oncoming vehicle, but they end up in the middle of the road and are hit by a large truck. A year later, Manel is living alone with his cat, grieving the loss of his wife. Reporters discuss the UN's plans to close borders due to a strange virus spreading rapidly. Preventative measures aren't working, and people are becoming violent while trying to escape across borders. Deep in depression, Manel barely listens to the news and eventually mutes the TV, missing footage of a hospital patient slowly turning into a zombie. Later, Manel heads to the harbor to meet two women interested in buying his boat, which he hasn't used since Julia's death. While looking for the boat's papers, Manel finds Julia's bracelet, sparking a flood of bittersweet memories. On his way back home, Manel ignores a call from his sister, Belen. Back home, he ties Julia's bracelet around his cat's neck while hearing on TV that the virus has now reached Spain. That evening, Manel has a video call with Belen. Since her husband works for the government, her family is being relocated to the Canary Islands. She invites Manel to join them, but he declines. The next day, Manel notices his neighbors packing up and leaving. Deciding to follow suit, he gathers his things and takes his cat along. During the drive, he hears on the radio that a new variant of the virus is spreading across Europe. At the airport, Manel sends Belen a message saying he's changed his mind and will join her. As people line up to board planes, tickets start getting denied without any explanation. The big screen suddenly announces that all flights are canceled, and everyone receives an emergency alert on their phones declaring a civil security warning. Panic erupts, and some people try to force their way onto the planes. Manel gets a call from Belen, who tells him to go back home and stay there until they get more information. Since everyone is trying to get home, Manel gets stuck in heavy traffic. The radio reports that all roads and bridges are in the same situation. Eventually, many drivers abandon their cars and continue on foot. Manel grabs his cat and does the same. By nighttime, he finally reaches his neighborhood and sees a group of soldiers surrounding a building. They've set up a special tunnel leading into a house, and strange noises are coming from it. Manel watches in shock as two soldiers bring a zombie out of the house through the tunnel. A woman cries outside, begging for her sick husband, but the soldiers take the zombie away in a military vehicle. Afterward, Manel goes home and falls asleep. The next morning, Belen video calls him. She explains that safe zones are being organized to relocate people, but there's conflict within the army. The more people they take, the higher the risk of bringing the virus into the zones. Other countries have already failed with similar plans. She warns Manel to stay home no matter what. As more big cities declare quarantines and refuse to take in refugees, riots erupt on the streets. The virus is no longer contained, and zombies start appearing in neighborhoods, attacking and eating people. That afternoon, the government announces a state of emergency with new restrictions. All commercial activity must stop after 2 p.m., and the population can be conscripted by the military if needed. The next time Manel goes to the supermarket, he finds almost no food left. People are snatching items out of each other's hands. Manel grabs whatever he can and leaves. On his way out, he notices fighter jets flying overhead. He stops at a gas station for more supplies. Suddenly, a wounded cop appears, bumping into Manel before locking himself inside the station's store and securing the doors with handcuffs. Soon, more people arrive in the area, running and crying for help. Out of nowhere, a zombie attacks another officer, biting and eating his face. Manel grabs a mop to defend himself, but just as the zombie lunges at him, the fallen officer shoots it, spraying blood onto Manel's face. Inside the store, the wounded cop starts pounding on the glass as he begins to transform into a zombie. Manel hesitates, wanting to check on the officer who shot the zombie. The officer fires a warning shot at the ground, keeping Manel at a distance. After grabbing his supplies, Manel leaves. Moments later, the officer ends his own life. Later that day, the president finally appears on TV, announcing an extended lockdown. He warns that anyone who refuses to cooperate with the army and evacuation plans will face criminal charges. Using internet tutorials, Manel reinforces the walls of his house with tools he has and installs a security camera for safety. That evening, the army arrives in his neighborhood to start evacuations. Belen sends him a message, telling him to stay inside and promising to rescue him soon. Following her advice, Manel turns off all the lights and hides with his cat. He hears the soldiers pounding on his door but doesn't make a sound. Luckily, they don't break in or see him peeking through the window, so they eventually move on. 2 weeks later, Manel starts running out of food. He can no longer contact Belen because the phone lines are down. After much hesitation, he layers himself in clothing for protection, grabs a few tools for defense, and finally ventures out of his home. Manel breaks into several houses in search of food, but finds nothing in most of them. After hours of searching, he comes across a house where an old lady named Gabriella lives. Gabriella, who uses a wheelchair, explains she couldn't join the evacuation. Unfortunately, she also doesn't have any food. However, she tells Manel which neighbors had stocked up before the lockdown, as she had seen them hoarding supplies. Manel visits the houses Gabriella mentioned and finally starts finding food and other supplies, including a bike. The bike lets him travel further, and he manages to gather a decent amount of food, which he shares with Gabriella. He also gives her a walkie-talkie so they can stay in touch while he's out scavenging. Eventually, there's only one house left to visit, the one where the soldiers found the zombie. Manel carefully searches the house and finds no food, but does see a tank with dead fish. As he looks around, he suddenly senses someone behind him. Startled, he fires his weapon, thinking it's a zombie. Instead, it's another human, who immediately flees. Before leaving, Manel checks one last cupboard and finally finds some food. Days go by, and Manel and Gabriella start dining together regularly. One night, Manel gets drunk and sends Gabriella a message over the walkie-talkie, confessing that he regrets not spending more time with his family. That night, he dreams about the accident again, remembering how he and Julia were airlifted to the hospital by helicopter. Suddenly, he's jolted awake by Gabriella's voice on the walkie-talkie, telling him to turn on the radio. When Manel does, he hears a broadcast announcing that survivors are being taken to the Canary Islands. The voice shares coordinates for a rescue group gathering nearby. Gabriella is skeptical and doesn't trust the message, but Manel insists they're running out of food and need to try. The group is said to be at the Arousa estuary, and Manel suggests they can get there using his boat. Gabriella refuses, saying she'd only slow him down. Manel firmly promises to take care of her and refuses to leave her behind. The next morning, Manel grows worried when Gabriella doesn't answer his calls. Rushing to her house, he finds that she's taken her own life. She left a note thanking him for the kindness he showed her and urging him to save himself. On his way back home, Manel is suddenly attacked by a zombie. It manages to knock his weapon out of his hands. After a tough fight, Manel manages to kick the zombie off and climbs onto a car, but the zombie grabs his leg and tries to pull him down. The struggle continues as the zombie bites his arm. Luckily, his layers of protection stop the bite from breaking skin. Manel quickly opens the car door and uses it to hit the zombie, trapping its head in the broken glass. He runs to grab his weapon and shoots the zombie right as it frees itself. Back at home, he boils water to clean his weapon and tries sending another message to Belen, telling her he can't wait for her anymore, but there's still no service. Manel takes his bike and his cat, speeding down empty roads. Eventually, he encounters a barrier and is forced to enter the forest. Zombies start chasing him. Some try jumping at him, so Manel stays alert to dodge their attacks. He comes across an abandoned campsite and hesitates, fearing what he might find there. But with no other way out, he cautiously moves through. Suddenly, a large group of zombie campers appears, and Manel pedals as fast as he can to avoid them, managing to escape without getting bitten. Once out of the camp, Manel reaches another road, but there's a pile of bodies blocking the way. He's going too fast to stop and crashes off his bike. Thankfully, his cat is unharmed in its crate. Hearing zombies approaching, Manel gets back on the bike, but it won't start. With no choice, he grabs his belongings and starts running. Zombies chase him through the forest, coming dangerously close. Manel pushes himself to run faster and finally makes it to the harbor. He crosses a bridge and locks a gate behind him. The zombies soon reach the gate and break through the glass, but by then, Manel has crossed a stronger gate and manages to escape. He spots an abandoned boat farther out in the water. He swims to it and tries starting the engine, but it doesn't work. While checking the boat, he hears a noise and finds a zombie baby strapped to a chair in one of the rooms. Realizing the boat won't work, Manel leaves on a small raft with his cat. He tries heading to the coordinates from the radio message, but when he gets there, the place is destroyed. He keeps paddling, but no matter how far he goes from the shore, his phone still has no signal. Even so, he continues recording messages for Belen. That night, the raft suddenly stops. When Manel investigates, he discovers a body tangled in the engine. Just then, Manel notices a bright light coming closer. He waves his arms and yells for help. It turns out to be a boat with Ukrainian men who agree to take him aboard. Manel and his cat are brought to a large ship where they're given food. The only person who speaks Spanish is Victor, who explains that the Canary Islands have been quarantined. The police didn't allow the evacuated survivors to disembark, which is why so many zombies are now roaming the mainland. Manel is given a room after promising to help them look for supplies the next day. Late that night, he hears voices and looks out the window to see survivors on a boat asking for help. In the morning, he asks Victor about the survivors, but Victor denies that anyone came last night. Later, Manel is called to the captain's office to help identify important buildings on the map, like hospitals and factories. Afterward, Manel discovers the survivors' boat is now on the ship, and the crew has taken all their possessions. He confronts Victor, but Victor avoids answering his questions. Since Victor is a pilot, Manel mentions he knows where to find a helicopter, but Victor warns him to stay quiet and stop asking questions. That evening, Manel explores the ship and notices it's full of boats taken from other survivors. He gathers his belongings, hides his cat cat in his bag and sneaks around. Downstairs, he finds 2 survivors tied up. Manel quickly frees the first man, but as soon as he stands up, a guard shoots him. Victor shows up at that moment and tries to disarm the guard. They wrestle over the gun, which accidentally fires and damages the area around them. The fight escalates into a fistfight, and Victor eventually uses a rope to choke the guard to death. Now, Victor wants to escape too and agrees to find the helicopter. Manel, Victor, and the remaining survivor sneak through the ship and make it to a boat. Just as they're about to leave, 2 guards open fire, killing the second survivor. Victor returns fire, but he gets wounded in the shoulder. Manel speeds up the boat to escape before they're both killed. Once they reach the shore, Manel helps Victor walk. They find a lot of abandoned cars, including one with a zombie trapped inside. Manel quickly kills the zombie, and they take one of the vehicles. Their destination is the hospital where Julia died because Manel remembers seeing a helicopter there. During the drive, Victor explains the ship's captain was a terrible person who was building a private refuge on an island. He only allowed people who served him to live there, while women and children were taken for his pleasure. When they finally arrive at the hospital, Manel is heartbroken to see that the helicopter is no longer on the roof. A zombie suddenly jumps onto the car, and Manel drives wildly to shake it off. He grabs Victor's gun and shoots the zombie, but the noise attracts more of them. Manel quickly shoots down the incoming zombies and then heads into the hospital with Victor and the cat. Inside, Manel searches for a tool to remove the bullet from Victor's shoulder. While looking around, he hears voices coming from the first floor and decides to investigate. As he goes upstairs, he spots a zombie nearby and hides before it sees him. The voices seem to be coming from the vents, so he starts talking to whoever is inside. Suddenly, another zombie sneaks up behind him. Manel shoves it away and shoots it, but the noise draws even more zombies. They burst through the doors, forcing Manel to run back to the room he started in. He locks the doors behind him to keep the zombies out. To his surprise, Victor and the cat are no longer in the room. As Manel looks around, a chute opens, and a woman named Lucia tells him to jump in. He quickly joins her, and they shut the chute just as the zombies break through the other doors. Lucia takes Manel to an infirmary, where Nurse Lucia and Sister Cecilia are tending to Victor's wound. 3 children and the cat are also there. When Manel mentions the helicopter, Lucia explains it's behind the hospital in the quarantine area, which is packed with zombies. That night, the group shares their small amount of food with Manel. The next morning, Manel goes to the roof to watch the zombies and unexpectedly gets a phone signal. He receives all the messages Belen sent him over the past weeks. While recording a reply, he hears gunfire and sees the ship crew fighting their way through the zombies to enter the hospital. Manel rushes back to warn the group about the danger. They decide to use the hospital basement to reach the helicopter. The basement is filled with smoke and bodies, so they cover their noses and mouths as they move. When they reach the exit door, it's stuck. They use an axe to force it open, but a zombie attacks and bites Cecilia. Manel pulls the zombie off her and burns its face against a hot pipe before Lucia finishes it off with the axe. Knowing she's infected, Cecilia tells the group to leave without her. They continue through a corridor where zombies are blocked by furniture. Lucia quietly unlocks the door, but one of the children recognizes her zombie mother and whispers her name. Thankfully, the zombies don't hear, and they move toward the door. Suddenly, a zombie knocks over some shelves, creating a loud crash. The noise alerts the other zombies. Manel quickly hides with the child in a cabinet, while the others take cover behind the door. The zombies start pounding on the cabinet. However, the ship crew arrives and shoots down all the zombies in just a few minutes. After a brief argument among themselves, the crew leaves without noticing anyone hiding nearby. With the path now clear, the group makes it to the final door and sees a yard full of zombies. Recalling an internet tutorial, Manel ties together a bunch of cages to create a makeshift shield, and they use it to cross the yard. At first, everything goes smoothly, but when one of the wheels gets stuck, the noise draws the zombies' attention. Lucia uses her axe, and Manel wields a fire extinguisher to fight off the zombies while Victor pushes the cages forward. Slowly but surely, they manage to make it to the gate. Lucia breaks the chain with her axe and stays with Manel to hold off the zombies, while Victor runs ahead with the kids to the helicopter. After a lot of effort, Manel and Lucia finally manage to shut the gate and lock it with a scarf, then rush to join the others. At the helicopter, Victor tries to start the engine, but it won't work, and the zombies begin climbing over the fence. Manel steps out to fight them, while Victor finds an unplugged cable and reconnects it, finally getting the helicopter started. The sound of the engine draws the attention of the ship crew, who show up in the yard and start shooting at the zombies. The crew cuts the scarf to open the gate and threatens to shoot Manel and his group if they don't cooperate. Victor subtly signals to Manel, who breaks another chain to open a second gate. A fresh horde of zombies rushes in, quickly surrounding the crew and biting them. A few zombies approach the helicopter, so Victor makes it hover to push them off. Meanwhile, Manel fights his way through the horde, taking down zombies with the axe. Once the zombies are cleared out, Lucia throws down a ladder from the helicopter, and Manel climbs up to reunite with his group and his cat. A few hours later, the helicopter nears the Canary Islands. At that moment, Manel receives a call from Belen, who tells him not to come. Moments later, 2 fighter jets fly by, confirming that the islands are infected as well. Don't forget to subscribe. Here's some more interesting story you don't want to miss.